Hello, my name is Adam Craig. Today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence and conflict resolution effectiveness. Now, emotions and conflict are important to all leaders as it's a part of everyday life, and it comes up in organizations all the time. In a study of U.S. construction workers, basically found that every single worker surveyed had experienced conflict at one point in their career. Of the 41 conflicts surveyed on these construction sites, they averaged approximately $11,000 per conflict cost to the organization. Now, the highest costs were in excess of $360,000, whereas the lowest costs were a mere $25. So it's quite a wide spread there. If we look at medical malpractice litigation as a form of conflict, in the United States alone, it costs approximately $55 billion annually. Interestingly, a small percentage of doctors account for a disproportionately large amount of those litigation cases. And it has no relation to the skill or the error or the culpability of that doctor. However, emotional intelligence, high levels of it, seem to reduce the probability that a doctor will be involved in a medical malpractice case. So we have a wide range of conflict outcomes from benign to extremely costly. And there seems to be a relationship with emotional intelligence. So what we want to know is how can we use that information for our leaders to better improve the outcomes of conflict for our organizations? Now, researchers generally accept that there are five styles of conflict management: avoiding, dominating, accommodating, compromising, and collaborating. Each one of those styles is distinguished by the amount of concern that it shows for your own interests as well as that of others. Your conflict style can be measured by instruments such as the Thomas Kilmann conflict instrument mode. Similarly, there are multiple types of conflict that an organization can encounter, specifically task, relationship, and process conflict. Jen and Mannix in 2001 looked at a variety of teams, and they found that high-performing teams tended to experience task and process conflict early to midway through the experience of working together on a project, as opposed to low-performing teams, all of which essentially started with low levels of conflict, and then that crescendoed into a ton of conflict of all three types: task, relationship, and process at the end of working together. As far as the outcome is concerned, how and when a team encounters conflict really does make a big difference, as well as how they go about, how they approach that conflict. So looking at business school students and teams across a semester, DeChurch and Marks noted that teams which had an active approach to conflict management, which is collaborating or actually competing approaches, they earned higher grades than teams that had a passive management style, such as avoidance or accommodating. And that's performance as measured by the grade that they earned in the class. Interestingly enough, the amount of conflict did not correlate at all to performance. It was simply the way in which they managed that conflict. In the business place, poorly handled conflict, specifically when it's handled with avoidance as an approach, tends to lead to workplace bullying. And then finally, when the style of management, conflict management that's used is one that avoids any party's interests, such as avoiding, competing, or accommodating, that leads to an overall decrease in satisfaction with the outcome by all participants, regardless of what side that you're on. The point here is pretty clear. How leaders approach conflict matters to the outcome. So the question becomes, what influences how leaders approach conflict, and does emotional intelligence play a role? Emotional intelligence was first defined in 1990 as the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's own thinking and actions. Since then, a few different models have been proposed of exactly what makes up emotional intelligence, such as this popular example, which is presented by Daniel Goleman. Each model is slightly different in how it defines emotional intelligence and how it measures it. Goleman and Boyatzis theorized that emotional intelligence comprises of 12 competencies in 4 major areas. Emotional self-awareness is a competency of itself. Social awareness breaks down into empathy, organizational awareness. Self-management consists of the competencies emotional self-control, adaptability, achievement orientation, and positive outlook. Finally, relationship management contains influence, coaching and mentoring, conflict management, teamwork, and inspirational leadership. Now, whichever model is used, the research is pretty clear. It's something distinctly different from personality, and it's highly correlated to performance across a wide variety of areas. Specifically, it correlates very strongly to academic performance, distinctly different from general cognitive ability. A very strong correlation was found between medical students and their class rank. And then in a 5-year longitudinal study, emotional intelligence actually accounted for the difference in academic performance when looking at students with the same cognitive abilities as measured by standardized testing. Research further supports the role of emotional intelligence leaders as having a positive correlation with performance. In military aircrew teams, the emotional intelligence of the leader related positively to the overall team performance. Within the Australian public service sector, a leader's emotional intelligence correlated to their effectiveness as rated by supervisors and also in a 360-degree review. And those differences couldn't be explained by general cognitive ability alone. Interestingly, a similar study in India found results where the subordinates did in fact rank their middle and senior level managers higher based on emotional intelligence. However, the supervisor's ratings had no relationship to emotional intelligence scores, but rather the style of leadership that those managers employed. Some of the strongest advocates of emotional intelligence as critical to leadership effectiveness reviewed multiple studies and found evidence of a leader's emotional intelligence level as a determining factor in profit increases, customer satisfaction, and retention rates across private enterprises. So if emotional intelligence plays a role in the effectiveness of a leader, how does it influence conflict? Well, early studies into emotional intelligence and negotiation theorized that emotional intelligence in negotiators would allow them to get better information, assess risk better, and then use their emotions and the emotions of others to achieve the outcomes that they want. Research into the outcomes in negotiation found that negotiators with high levels of emotional intelligence tended to create more value overall in the negotiation for all parties involved, similar to a collaborative approach. And also that all parties usually felt more positively about negotiation than they did with low emotional intelligence investigators. It is interesting to note, however, that highly emotionally intelligent negotiators tended to claim less value for themselves at their side. However, the results seem to indicate that a high level of emotional intelligence in negotiators do in fact get better results with what appears to be a collaborative approach. In 2004, Jordan and Trough presented teams of participants with a survival game, which caused conflict as the teams deliberated over the best course of action under time pressure. In the study, found that high levels of emotional intelligence in the teams correlated to a higher level team performance in terms of decision quality. They also specifically found that the higher performance correlated only with the ability to manage one's own emotions, not with the ability to use or understand the emotions of others. Other studies into the roles of emotional intelligence in a leader's conflict style do indicate that emotional intelligence is a strong predictor of conflict style management. Leaders with high emotional intelligence are more likely to utilize collaborative conflict management styles and less likely to use avoidance or dominating. Hopkins and Yonker in 2015, they used the Bar-On EQI measurement to discriminate between the effects of the various emotional intelligence competencies. They found that high levels of only some competencies, specifically problem solving and social responsibility, tended to increase the variety of styles that a supervisor would employ in any situation. They also noted that impulse control negatively correlated to the use of dominating styles and that other EQI competencies had no relationship to the style that was used. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that high emotional intelligence will make all outcomes better. In fact, a 2015 study looked at a variety of aggressive or toxic tactics during conflict resolution, and the study indicated that high emotional intelligence did not actually correlate with the managers avoiding those toxic behaviors or aggressive tactics. But generally, in terms of outcome, high emotional intelligence tends to correlate to positive results for the organization. It correlates positively to how each party feels after a conflict, to the participants' desire to continue to work with the other party in the future. High emotional intelligence in employees actually predicts organizational citizenship behaviors by employees when their boss uses a dominating or withdrawing style of conflict resolution. A survey of government employees in Indonesia showed not only the positive correlation between emotional intelligence and collaborative approaches to conflict, but also an improved job performance for those employees after conflict. Taken together, it's clear that emotional intelligence plays a role in conflict resolution and the effectiveness of the leader. Now, when it comes to assessing emotional intelligence in leaders, there are multiple models, and each one of those models has its own way of measuring emotional intelligence. Early critics of emotional intelligence noted that despite the demonstrated reliability, the proprietary nature of the assessment tools made it difficult to truly know if they were assessing what they claimed. However, the main assessment tools for emotional intelligence are the Myers-Solovey-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test version 2, or MSCEIT v2, which measures emotional intelligence as originally proposed by Meyer and Solovey in 1990. Then there's the Bar-On Emotional Quotient Inventory. And then lastly, the ESCI, or Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, measures the model of emotional intelligence previously referenced by Daniel Goleman. While it is not the newest emotional intelligence inventory in use, it does include both a self-assessment and a 360-degree assessment of the individual, which the other measures lack. It also claims uniqueness in the fact that it says that it measures observable behaviors as opposed to self-reported traits and preferences. Supporters of the ESCI defend its validity by referencing a number of studies where the ESCI measurements of leaders predicted the outcomes in terms of overall performance. The fact that it predicts leadership effectiveness does not necessarily prove that it measures emotional intelligence. However, it does seem appropriate for studies of leadership through the lens of emotional intelligence. So in conclusion, the research supports that emotional intelligence plays a role in the effectiveness of a leader, that emotional intelligence predicts success in a variety of contexts to include leadership, that not all EI competencies measured by a test such as the ESCI will correlate to an improved performance of groups after experiencing conflict. Now, similar previous research has not used the ESCI nor identified if any competencies specifically influence performance or satisfaction, and if so, to what degree. So based on the research, when looking to discover those relationships, I would hypothesize the following: that emotional self-control, adaptability, achievement orientation, and positive outlook, as measured by the ESCI in a leader, will positively correlate to improved team performance after the conflict. Second, that conflict management and teamwork competencies in a leader will positively correlate to overall team satisfaction after the conflict. That concludes my literature review. Thank you for considering my work. I hope you found this information useful. Here is a list of references of works that were cited within this literature review. Thank you, and have a nice day.